action. If the Nicene Confession opens a theological horizon for communion, the question becomes how such a vision speaks into a world marked by colonial histories, structural injustice, and contested futures. The surge for just peace today unfolds within global realities where the language of unity, and we know that, has often been used to legitimize domination. And this is actually a bit hard to say as a moderator of the Faith and Order Commission, where the utmost goal is a search for unity. And we know that it has been used to legitimize domination also when it comes to theology. For a European theologian speaking in an African context, this requires a posture of listening as much as speaking, recognizing that theological concepts shaped in imperial centers must be re-examined through the experiences of communities historically positioned at the margins. The Faith and Order World Conference tried to offer an important contemporary echo of this shift. In its affirmation and call to the faithful, emphasizes that Christian unity cannot be separated from justice, ecological responsibility, and solidarity with those who suffer, calling Christians towards, and I quote, a unity that serves justice and peace. This ecumenical language signals a transition from institutional cohesion towards relational accountability and resonates deeply with decolonial perspectives that challenge inherited assumptions about authority and theological ownership. Post-colonial theory further sharpens this critical awareness. And we already got Spivak quoted by you several times, Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak's well-known observation about colonial discourse. And she speaks about the logic of white men saving brown women from brown men. This exposes how narratives of protection can silence the agency of those they claim to help, as we can read in Can the Subaltern Speak? Read in the light of Christian history, this warning invites a self-critical question. When the church or the Faith and Order speaks of unity, mission, or peace, does it actually enable participation, or does it reproduce paternalistic patterns embedded in colonial Christianity? African theological voices offer vital sources for reimagining this conversation. And thank you for letting me listen during the last days. There was so much reimagination in this room. Thank you. Mercy Amba Oduyuwe insisted that authentic community must be grounded in justice and mutuality, reminding the global church that, and I quote, community that excludes or silences cannot be called koinonia, in introducing African women's theology. Such perspectives challenge any assumptions that peace and just peace can be achieved through centralized control. Instead, peace is understood as a relational, flourishing, rooted and lived community. In this context, just peace cannot be reduced to the absence of conflict or the maintenance of global stability. It involves dismantling structures that perpetuate dependency, amplifying local agency, and cultivating forms of unity that respect cultural difference. The Nicene vision of communion, interpreted through decolonial lenses, may thus become not a relic of imperial theology, or at least not only a relic of imperial theology, but a resource for ongoing transformation. The task of the Church is not to export solutions, but to participate humbly in processes of reconciliation shaped by mutual learning and shared responsibility. The theme for my lecture was from the Pax Romana to Just Peace, and Nicaea and the theological foundations of social transformation. That's quite a lot. So I didn't have the possibility to dig really deeply into the whole concept of just peace, where you also find a lot of theological work done on what is just peace. And I would just recommend you to look into some of the WCC resources on just peace, like the ecumenical call to just peace, saying we propose that just peace may be comprehended as a collective and dynamic, yet grounded process of freeing human beings from fear and want, of overcoming enmity, discrimination and oppression, and of establishing conditions for just relationship that privilege the experience of the most vulnerable and respect the integrity of creation. That's quite a definition. It's a typical WCC definition, I would say, bringing together everything, but nevertheless, I think there is lots of really good resources, broader resources also, how to work with communities on what it would mean to live just peace locally, in societies, and also globally. So please, just look into these resources. I'm coming towards my final conclusion paragraph, speaking from Europe, listening in Africa, Nicaea, decolonization, and just peace. To reflect on Nicaea in an African context as a European theologian requires more than contextual sensitivity, it also demands positional honesty. I do not speak from outside the histories of empire and colonialism that have shaped Christianity's global presence. I speak from within a European tradition that has benefited from, and at times theologically justified, systems of domination, extraction, and also epistemic control. Any engagement with Nicaea here must therefore begin with accountability. Contemporary conflicts remind us that the ambiguity between political and spiritual power, visible already at Nicaea, has not disappeared, rather the opposite. In some contexts, Christian language has been mobilized explicitly in support of militarized nationalism. The ideological alignment, for instance, between the Russian state and the leadership of Patriarch Kirill, often framed through narratives of a sacred civilization or a metaphysical struggle against the West, illustrates how theological symbols can be used to legitimize violence and imperial ambition. Many theologians and church leaders, including voices within global orthodoxy itself, and I'm looking to our brother Evangelos, who is a quite outspoken theologian when it comes to decolonial perspectives on these themes, these issues, have warned that such rhetoric risks transforming the gospel into an instrument of state ideology rather than a witness to reconciliation. There are so many conflicts going on over the world, even the conflict in Israel and Palestine, that reveal how religious language can be drawn into projects of exclusion and domination when political power claims divine sanction. Naming these realities is not an attack on particular peoples or traditions, but it is a recognition that whenever churches or religious leaders bless war, sanctify terror, or fuse national destiny with divine will, they stand dangerously close to repeating the Constantinian temptation that has accompanied Christianity and Christian theology since Nicaea. A church committed to just peace must therefore exercise prophetic distance from political power, especially when theological language is used to justify violence or deny the dignity of others. For many African communities, the Nicene Creed didn't arrive, and we know that, as a neutral confession of faith. It was mediated through colonial churches, missionary structures, and educational system that often conflated Christian unity with cultural conformity and theological orthodoxy with European norms. In this process, a creed born within the Roman Empire was re-inscribed with modern colonial orders. The result was frequently a Christianity that proclaimed peace while reproducing dependency, hierarchy, and exclusion. Naming this history is not an act of self-denial, but a theological necessity. Without such naming, appeals to Nicaea risk repeating the very imperial logic they seek to overcome. From a decolonial perspective, the question is therefore not whether Nicaea is true, but how it was being used, and who has been authorized to interpret it, and how we use it today. And I tried in this little chapter to say that there are aspects of Nicene theology which can be really helpful for us on our path towards just peace. Yet, speaking critically from Europe doesn't require abandoning, as I said, the creed. Rather, it requires relinquishing control over its meaning. And somehow this is what has been happening here during these days when all of you reinterpreted in your ways the legacy of Nicaea. A decolonial rereading of Nicaea entails a shift from ownership to reception, from teaching to listening. Acknowledging that African churches and theologians are not recipients of Nicene theology, but active interlocutors whose experiences of colonialism, resistance, and communal life expose both the distortions and the unrealized possibilities of the creed. Here, maybe homoousios can be heard anew, not as an abstract metaphysical claim imposed from elsewhere, but as a joint confession, because Nicaea is our joint confession. It's not the global north or the west or the fathers in gathering in Iznik, but it's our joint Christian confession. In fact, it's the only joint Christian ecumenical confession which we have. So a decolonial rereading of Nicaea entails a shift, and I speak about the Nicene Creed from 381. A decolonial rereading of Nicaea entails a shift from ownership to reception, from teaching to listening. Here, as I said, homoousios can be heard anew, and maybe read in conversation with African struggles for dignity and agency. The Nicene vision of unity without domination becomes a critical resource for imagining just peace beyond colonial and neo-colonial forms of order. Just peace, from this standpoint, cannot be separated from decolonization. It involves dismantling theological habits that universalize European experience, unsettling ecclesial structures that perpetuate dependency, and affirming local capacities for theological reflection and social transformation. Peace imposed from above, whether imperial, colonial, or technocratic, remains a contradiction in terms. To speak of Nicaea here then is not to bring answers, but to enter a shared and unfinished conversation marked by asymmetrical histories, but oriented towards mutual responsibility. Let us make Nicaea our joint journey to be reinterpreted together. Between empire and communion, between inherited creeds and living contexts, the search for just peace calls for humility, listening, and the courage to allow theology itself to be transformed. Perhaps the most faithful way to honor Nicaea today is not to repeat its words triumphantly, but to let them question how we live, how we lead, and speak in a wounded world. To confess homoousios, therefore, not only to repeat an ancient formula, but to witness to a unity that refuses domination, a communion that resists every ideology seeking to divide, exclude, or sanctify violence, and that invites the Church into the unfinished work of just peace. And I conclude with a little picture from the Mekane Jesus Church Seminary in Ethiopia. The peace dove looks a little bit rusty, but it is there. So let's continue together on our journey towards just peace and possibly look for resources within the Nicene tradition which can help us to move towards this just peace together, taking with us the rusty peace dove of the Ethiopian Orthodox, not the Lutheran Church in Ethiopia. Thank you very much.
Could we just change?
She's been ousted. That is what my says on what you are ousted from your seat. But thank you so much, Stephanie, for that analysis that encompasses history in a very critical way, but a critical way that helps us to move on by saying that in terms of peace, in terms of the creed of who God is a question of relationship. It is communion rather than hierarchy. And in a world where we are all led to be who is more powerful, who is stronger, who has authority, and that critique of history helps us to reimagine a new way of relating, whether it is along ethnic lines, along gender lines, or along racial lines. So thank you so much. I do love history when it is analyzed theologically, sociologically, etc. So thank you so much for that talk. I want to welcome those that came from, and I'm going to give them another college. What is your name? Macario Seminary. I was going to say St. Timothy because we work with St. Timothy as well. So I want to welcome all those that have come from Macario Seminary, and thank you so much, Principal, for not coming alone. You know, even those who went to Nicaea, you went in groups so that you are not attacked. But because you came late, we have already made the decision. The Orthodox have taken over. But thank you again for building on to what has been done this week in terms of critiquing exclusion, critiquing discrimination, critiquing the powers that destroy and bringing to light ways in which the Nicene Creed could help us in relating. So brothers who came from Macarius, I think they were all brothers. There are some sisters. Please stand so that we recognize you. Please stand, those everyone who came from Macarius. We were just saying earlier that in Egypt, when our speaker was sharing the Nicaea conference, that the room was full of those that wore robes. And when I look at you, you've already filled the room with the robes. So you are really, really welcome. Very, very welcome. And we want to appreciate the principal for not coming alone. But being very African, when you have guests, you bring others to enjoy what the guests bring. Let's still welcome them with a clap. I'm so delighted. We missed all the introductions, so we will know you and you will not know us. Karibuni sana. For the remaining time, I'm going to ask if there are observations, there are questions, there are comments to be made over this. The speaker this morning was the vice moderator of Faith and Order of the World Council of Churches. That is Dr. Stephanie Dietrich. She's the one who's speaking to us, a close friend of your principal. So your principal knows people. You know that phrase in Kenya? You should know people. So your principal knows people. Asante. So comments, observations, questions, then we'll stop for tea and then come back and continue. Comments, questions, observations that you want to make? Yes, that is the two brothers at the corner there. That is Paul and Moses. So we'll hear a third person, she'll speak back, and then we can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Stefan. I was happy with the statement that a community that excludes or silences the voices cannot be called koinonia, according to Mercy Amber. He talked about some elements of Nicaea being good. That one means there are some which are bad. So what can we do to these which are bad so that they can be good? Is there anything that we can do? Now, thank you for the paper or for the presentation. Another question is, how does the paper reconcile the theological quest for a just society with the increased entanglement of church and state established by Emperor Constantine, which often subordinated the church witness to imperial interests? Question number 3, does interpreting the Council of Nicaea as a foundation for just peace ignore its immediate aftermath, where Nicene orthodoxy was enforced through imperial power and suppression of dissenting Christianities? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Stephanie, for the presentation. I'm Paul Mwangi. I'm delighted to have sat in this presentation. My observation is that as we look at the theological meaning of Nicaea in 21st century, probably the fruits of Nicaea through the Inquisition and all the other bits and pieces of what became of the church after Constantine left Rome and went to Constantinople. I think that heritage, sometimes we don't critique it. We don't blame it. At times we embrace it, even as we interpret what happened. Now we are talking about relationships. And probably in Pentecostal language, the church was imparted and it became strong. It became a state. Thank you.
So that was an observation. That was an observation. Any other question? And people online, we acknowledge you. And if there's anybody who wants to speak, please do raise your hand and we will listen to you. The people online.
The two more here.
The two? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stephanie, for that powerful presentation. I picked the word freeing human beings from fear in order to overcome discrimination. And one of my major niche is to sex theology for the dignity of human sexuality, especially from the context of the body. And my question is, Is it possible for somebody to overcome fear and find peace in the context that continues to break the person even further? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Stephanie. This was very insightful for me, especially not being a historian. Do I need to stand?
Please do.
Yeah, my name is John Kiboy. You brought out a lot of insights for me, not being a historian, but I use history for my theologization. You are proposing that homoousios becomes a paradigm for unity and peace in today's church, in today's society. But historically, we remember that at the council, it is this very same homoousios that divided the same congregation. Arius leaving for the north, Antioch, to continue propagating his Antiochian Christology, and Alexandrian Christology purported to remain orthodoxy. Now, in your concluding points, there is one very particular one. You say homoousios not as an abstract metaphysical claim, but as a confession that challenges every hierarchy, presenting itself as divinely sanctified. That one I absolutely agree with you. I agree with almost everything you've said. But what I'm struggling with is, how does that which divided the church become that which unites us today, especially in a context where many people are saying Nicene was too abstract, and especially in Africa, therefore today it is not giving us our pragmatic approach to life, which is very Ubuntu. Thank you. Perhaps you could comment on that.
Okay, thank you so much. One more, and then after that we will open. Because our best friend is raising his hand, so I'll have to accept. Go ahead.
Yes,
Name.
my name is Paul Karimu. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
My question is this, because according to what I've heard from the speaker, is that on this concept of the two kinds of peace, just peace and the other kind which you mentioned. But there is this question that so long as the government, there is the way in which we can relate with the government, but it should not dominate upon us as the church. Now, my question was, during that era of the first ecumenical council, or during the Constantine era, how did the government dominate over the church, or what negative effects did the domination of the government over the church bring into the church? That's my question.
Okay, so the church-state relations that Constantine and Constantine context challenges as well.
Thank you. My name is Evangelos, for those who don't know me. And thank you, Stephanie, for this. Actually, I was lost, but then I had your voice, and I knew where to come. so thank you for that. And I was very happy because at the end, although we were late, and we apologize for that, I found something that I love very much, the church and state issue. And from where I stand, Constantine seems to be very good in utilizing the church for his own purposes. And today now the world is going that way. The church has a responsibility to handle and to make sure that the gospel is pure, and to speak wisdom to power, and to propagate the gospel even to those people in power. unfortunately, we always miss out. Why is it that the church is the one that loses often and not the politicians? We tend to always lose. Instead of we speaking to them, they speak to us, and they buy us to an extent that people are dying, corruption continues, a lot of resources are lost, young lives have no future, nations are corrupted and brought down. Why is it that it is the church really that always loses out on these concepts, on this war, if I may call it so? Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. We'll invite Stephanie to do her second paper. Because all the questions you asked, she has to write another paper, so we'll ask her to, but this one she'll have to write as she thinks. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this is not easy to start with the last question. I mean, why is it that churches are called to speak wisdom to power, but they fail? I guess, I mean, we are all the ones to answer why corruption is also part of the church's life, why power struggles and are a part of church life. So we have to reform ourselves from the inside. And my attempt was to say that Nicaea is not. Nicaea has very many levels, and the history of Nicaea is very complex, but it's a clear reminder that it's very easy to confuse and to mix what the church actually stands for with what the states want us to stand for, and this is repeating itself all the time. At the same time, you could also say that the fact that Christianity became the religion of the state brought an end to martyrdom, to persecution, which is nice, isn't it? I mean, with strong states protecting faith communities. I remember one of my Orthodox brothers from Syria under the time of the former regime. Certainly that regime was profoundly a dictatorship, but the churches somehow were surviving quite well with quite a good freedom, which is nice. So the reality is complex, but the call to the church is to stand up and to reflect, is it because I want more power, or is it actually the message of the gospel and our faith in the triune God which is guiding us in our relation with the state? And I mean, all over the world, just looking to America for the moment, the US, you see that it's all mixed up. But there are churches actually standing up. And by the way, a good friend of mine in the US just said, you know, Donald Trump is helping us now to search for unity and act ecumenically, because his way of proclaiming what is Christianity from our side is so wrong that it helps us to stand together ecumenically. So, reality is messy. For the first question, a community that includes voice, it cannot be called koinonia. Nicaea is not good or bad, and that was maybe also one of the problems at the World Conference, because for some people Nicaea is a divine intervention, while for others it's just an awful history of Christian oppression through the state. Maybe it's all of this. It's messy and it's complex, and acknowledging that it's messy and complex and interpreting it together, I think that is, and finding new ways of interpreting it and learning from it, I think that's the way forward. So the increased entanglement between church and state, which somehow Nicaea is blamed for, historically, yes and no, and we can learn from it. And it can remind us as theologians and churches to try to act in a different way, which many churches actually are doing. I clearly see your critique against applying the concept of homoousios as a model for to try to work for just peace, because it's working against hierarchies and dominion. But it's one attempt from my side of constructive theology in order to try to see which elements of the Nicene Creed are not just about the relation between the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit and the godly communion, but how can you actually think about this interaction between God also as a critical aspect of developing our theologies in a good way together. But we know, and certainly the time of Nicaea, there was not one faith established, but the church fathers and mothers were trying to see what do we actually agree on. And the fact that Christ is both God and human was one of the decisive factors of agreement which were taken forward, even though we know that the discussion for and against Arius kept going after 325. And only in 381 the Nicene Creed with the homoousios as we know it today was decided on. And then later on it was messed up from the Western churches with the Filioque, when the Filioque was added, which I personally think should be removed, but that's also another issue of the Nicene theological discussion. So the church became strong through Nicaea. I think we both need to critique Nicaea and to learn from Nicaea. This complexity, I think, is something we have to take forward. How can we free human beings from fear? Is it possible for somebody to overcome fear? And can Nicaea help us? Maybe Nicaea, the Nicene theology in the way of lifting up equal communities and speaking against dominion can help us. Not to overcome fear, but to develop theologies that in the end create just peace. And where there's just peace, there's no fear. But that's a long way. And the basis for this is our joint reinterpretation of this doctrinal foundation of our Christian faith, speaking against dominion, speaking against hierarchies, and through this trying to overcome fear. But that's a long way, and the basis is our joint interpretation, our community of interpretation. So I guess this was maybe certainly not a full answer to all the questions, but it was an attempt to reflect on some of your questions, and I think the complexity of the Nicene and the messiness of the Nicene history is something which will follow us, and the interpretation and how Nicaea is taught throughout the centuries. It's complex and it's messy. But admitting that it's complex and messy is in itself a step forward. And only our joint community of reinterpreting it can help us actually to move towards a rusty but just peace.
Thank you so much. Let's appreciate Dr. Stephanie. Thank you. The messiness, the complexity, the beautifulness and all stuff of Nicaea. We are grateful that you had a chance to come and share your thoughts with us. And many of us joined for the conversation. But we have to end here and prepare for something else, right? So I'm here to give 2 announcements, and then we break for tea. So when we come, we are going to break for tea now. We are going to go to Abigail. The stewards will guide all of us to Abigail, where we'll have tea. When we come back, we have a good problem, 4 presenters in a very short time. So we try to have 2 or 3, and then we see what we do in the afternoon. In the afternoon, we have a completely different thing, Gen Z panel. Gen Z is occupying the room to have conversations. So when we come back, Reverend Dr. John Kipoi, our HOD, will be chairing the paper presentations, and the names of the presenters, just to mention for them to prepare. In Kamali, we have, in the second, yes, Father Evangelos Tiani. We have Reverend Dr. Paul Mwangi, Reverend Dr. Canon Scholar Wayua, and Reverend Mary. We will see what we can do. Others can be pushed to occupy the Gen Z space and see what will happen at 2 p.m. So we break and go for tea, and we will be supported by the stewards.